Mark Lawson thought he knew his life. Carla Lawson thought she could keep her secrets. And Daniel Reed hid a betrayal so deadly it would cost a man his life. 2 weeks after Mark discovered his wife's affairs with 31 men, he was found dead, and no one knew who was truly behind it. Mark Lawson had always believed he knew his life. A successful career in real estate, a comfortable suburban home, and a wife he thought he could trust. Every morning he would wake early, make coffee, and scroll through emails before Carla woke up. Their life seemed perfect, ordinary in a comforting way. But one evening, while waiting for Carla to return from a work event, Mark noticed her phone left unattended on the kitchen counter. A sudden curiosity made him pick it up. At first, he told himself he was just checking for messages. But as he scrolled through her texts and hidden folders, he found something he could never have imagined. There were dozens of conversations, photographs, and even secret video calls, all proving that Carla had been involved with not 1 or 2 men, but 31 different men over the past year. The shock was immediate, an unbearable weight that pressed against his chest. He sank to the floor, staring at the evidence in disbelief. His mind raced through memories, trying to reconcile the woman he had loved with the woman on the screen. Every smile, every touch now seemed like a carefully constructed lie. Mark felt anger and betrayal surge through him, but beneath it was a deeper fear, an unsettling thought that maybe nothing in his life was real. He locked himself in his study, unwilling to confront Carla just yet. He needed time to process, to figure out what to do. He made lists, documented everything, and obsessively reviewed each message, each photo. Mark's life, once predictable and secure, now felt like a dangerous labyrinth of secrets, lies, and threats. By the end of the night, he realized this discovery was only the beginning. The shocking truth about Carla's affairs would change everything, and his world would never be the same again. After the shocking discovery, Mark Lawson's life took on a new rhythm, one that neighbors and friends quickly noticed. Gone were the mornings of casual coffee and newspaper reading. Instead, Mark spent hours peering out of his living room window, watching the street, cataloging every car that passed, every person who lingered. He started keeping a detailed notebook, marking times, names, and any unusual activity. Every step Carla took seemed to draw his obsessive attention. He avoided social gatherings, stopped answering calls from friends, and even declined invitations from his family. It was as if the walls of his home had become a cage, trapping him in a world where betrayal and paranoia ruled. Mark also began tracking Carla's schedule secretly. He memorized her work hours, her social events, and even the minor errands she ran. He downloaded apps to monitor location data, convinced that knowing her movements might provide answers, or at least a sense of control. But with every passing day, he felt someone watching him. A neighbor once mentioned seeing a shadowy figure near his driveway, lingering at odd hours, but Mark dismissed it as paranoia. Friends who tried to reach him noticed a change in his demeanor. Daniel, his closest friend, attempted casual visits, but Mark would avoid him, claiming he was busy with work or personal matters. Inside, however, Mark's mind was a whirlwind of fear and suspicion. Every unknown car, every unfamiliar face on the street felt like a threat. His obsession grew to the point where he barely slept, constantly reviewing the notebook he had created. The paranoia became a new companion, one that whispered that his wife's betrayal was only the beginning. Little did he know, someone else had already taken notice of his every move, silently observing from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The 2-week countdown to disaster had already begun. Mark Lawson's paranoia reached a fever pitch just days after he began tracking Carla's movements. It started with subtle warnings, anonymous messages slipped under his door, and signed letters left in his mailbox, and notes placed on his car windshield. Each one was brief but chilling. Stop digging. Some truths are better left buried, and you don't know who's watching. At first, Mark tried to convince himself it was a cruel prank, but the notes contained details only someone close to him could know. They referenced specific arguments he had with Carla, dates he had recorded in his notebook, and even certain errands he had run. Fear began gnawing at him. Mark's sense of security crumbled entirely. He began checking every lock, every window, and every corner of his home. He even installed cameras around the property, convinced that whoever was sending the messages could strike at any moment. Each morning he would wake up tense, scanning the house as if an intruder were hiding behind every door. The more he tried to secure his surroundings, the more he realized he couldn't control the situation. The messages grew increasingly aggressive. One note warned, "Stop before it's too late." Another simply said, "They are all watching." Mark's thoughts became clouded with suspicion. He wondered if Carla had orchestrated this, or if one of the 31 men she had affairs with wanted revenge. The idea that someone could manipulate him from the shadows made him feel powerless, even paranoid about his closest allies. In the evenings, he would pace his study, notebook in hand, trying to connect the dots. Sleep became impossible, his mind running through endless scenarios of betrayal and danger. Mark understood that the messages were more than warnings, they were a threat. He was trapped in a web of fear, paranoia, and uncertainty, completely unaware that this was only the beginning of a chain of events that would lead to his ultimate downfall. Mark Lawson's life had become a constant state of vigilance, but he was unaware that his fears were not entirely imagined. A presence followed him everywhere, a shadow that remained just out of sight. It started subtly, glimpses of movement in the corner of his eye, a figure lingering near the edge of the grocery store, or someone standing across the street when he returned from errands. At first, he thought it was coincidence or paranoia. But soon, the pattern became undeniable. The same man appeared in multiple places, always distant, hood pulled low, blending into crowds, never approaching, never speaking. The realization that he was being watched shook Mark even further. Whoever it was knew his routine, knew when he would leave the house, and seemed aware of his growing obsession with Carla's affairs. At night, he double-checked locks and windows, but the sense of being followed persisted. Even when he stayed inside, the feeling of eyes on him refused to fade. His paranoia merged with reality in a terrifying way, making every sound and shadow feel like a threat. Mark began documenting the sightings, noting times, locations, and descriptions of the mysterious figure. He even considered confronting the person but feared the consequences. Could it be Carla's accomplice? One of the men she had been involved with? Or someone entirely different? Someone with a more sinister purpose? The unknown stalker's presence added a dangerous edge to his already fragile mental state. The more Mark tracked the figure, the more obsessed he became with understanding their intentions. Each day, he felt the walls of his life closing in, as if the very act of observing him was a signal that his safety was slipping further away. Unbeknownst to him, this silent watcher was not just a random threat. They were calculating, patient, and waiting for the perfect moment. And that moment would come sooner than Mark could imagine, changing everything in a way he could never have anticipated. Mark Lawson's growing paranoia did not go unnoticed by those closest to him. Daniel Reed, his longtime friend, had been concerned for weeks. He tried to reach out, warning Mark that obsessing over Carla and the list of men could be dangerous, but Mark dismissed the advice. Instead, he confided only partially, revealing plans to confront Carla and each of the 31 men. Daniel noticed a strange tension in Mark, a fear that went beyond anger or heartbreak. It was as if Mark knew something else, something he wasn't sharing. Mark spent hours each day preparing, making lists, and planning confrontations. He believed that if he confronted Carla and the men, he could reclaim control over his life. But Daniel saw another side of Mark, a man who had become consumed by fear, who was no longer rational, and who was slipping into a dangerous obsession. He observed Mark pacing the study late at night, notebook in hand, talking to himself, obsessively reviewing messages and phone records. It was no longer just about Carla's betrayal. It was about survival, as Mark believed threats were closing in from every direction. Meanwhile, Mark's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He avoided social contact, rarely left the house, and became defensive when questioned about his movements. Even minor changes in Carla's routine caused panic. Daniel tried to intervene, suggesting professional help or at least a pause, but Mark's pride and fear prevented him from listening. Despite his obsession, Mark had no idea that someone else, closer than he could imagine, was quietly manipulating events. Daniel, who appeared loyal, was hiding a dangerous secret of his own. He had motives that Mark could not see, motives rooted in jealousy, desire, and self-preservation. As Mark planned his confrontations, he remained unaware that the very person he trusted most was already plotting a move that would change everything forever. The night of Mark Lawson's death began like any other tense evening in the Lawson household. Rain poured steadily outside, tapping against the windows in a rhythmic, almost hypnotic pattern. Mark stayed late in his study, surrounded by notebooks, phone records, and printouts of Carla's messages. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of floorboards and the soft hum of the heater. Carla had gone to a work party, and Daniel had left hours earlier, leaving Mark alone with his thoughts and mounting paranoia. As midnight approached, the atmosphere in the house grew heavy. Neighbors would later recall seeing lights flicker in the Lawson home, followed by a sudden blackout that lasted only a few minutes. Inside, Mark continued his obsessive review of the evidence, unaware of the events unfolding in the shadows. The mysterious figure that had haunted him for days seemed to have vanished, leaving only an unnerving stillness. Then came the sound of a loud crash. Glass shattered somewhere in the house, and a heavy thud echoed through the otherwise silent rooms. By morning, Mark was found in his study, lifeless on the floor, a single gunshot wound to the chest. His body was sprawled across the scattered papers and notebooks that had documented his descent into obsession. No weapon was found nearby, and the fingerprints on the scene belonged only to Mark. The police were initially puzzled, considering suicide as the most likely explanation. But the circumstances raised immediate questions: the broken glass, the scattered documents, and the missing notebook that contained critical evidence of Carla's affairs. The discovery shocked neighbors and friends alike. Mark, the man who had appeared in control despite personal heartbreak, was gone. His obsession, his fear, and the web of threats he had navigated had ended in tragedy. The mysterious presence that had stalked him, the anonymous messages, and the shadowy figure all suggested that this death was far from simple. Someone had acted that night, and the question that haunted everyone was the same: who had killed Mark Lawson, and why? The investigation into Mark Lawson's death quickly became a labyrinth of contradictions and unanswered questions. Police arrived at the scene and immediately noticed inconsistencies. The study was in disarray, with papers scattered across the floor and the broken glass from the previous night still lying in shards. The missing notebook, which contained detailed records of Carla's affairs and Mark's suspicions, was nowhere to be found. Forensics initially suggested suicide, pointing to gunpowder residue on Mark's hands and the trajectory of the bullet. But detectives were not convinced. Something about the scene felt staged, as if someone had carefully manipulated the evidence to point in one direction while hiding the truth. Carla insisted she had been at a work event all night, providing a shaky alibi, while Daniel claimed he had left hours before the incident and had no involvement. Police began to reconstruct the timeline, examining security footage and witness statements. Surveillance cameras had blind spots, particularly around the rear of the house where neighbors reported seeing shadows moving during the blackout. Investigators noted that any intruder could have used these blind spots to enter and exit undetected. The neighborhood buzzed with rumors. Some speculated that one of the 31 men Carla had been involved with had taken revenge. Others believed Mark's obsessive behavior might have driven him to take his own life. Detectives, however, suspected there was a third factor: an unseen hand manipulating events from behind the scenes. Small details didn't add up: the absence of a weapon, the missing notebook, and the precision of the gunshot all suggested a carefully planned act rather than a spontaneous suicide. The investigation expanded to include interviews with neighbors, colleagues, and anyone connected to Mark and Carla. Each conversation added pieces to the puzzle, but also created new mysteries. It became clear that Mark's death was not simply the tragic result of heartbreak and paranoia. It was the product of calculated manipulation. Someone had ensured that all eyes would see the wrong story, and uncovering the truth would require unraveling a web of secrets, lies, and betrayals that stretched far beyond the Lawson household. As the investigation into Mark Lawson's death deepened, police discovered a complex web of hidden enemies surrounding Carla Lawson. Each of the 31 men she had been involved with had a motive, ranging from jealousy to anger, and some had made veiled threats in the weeks leading up to Mark's death. Investigators quickly realized that Carla's life outside the home was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Every call, Every message she had exchanged could have escalated into violence. The more detectives dug, the clearer it became that Mark had not only been battling his own fears, but had unknowingly stepped into a minefield of secrets and grudges. Among the men, one stood out: Vincent Hayes. Known for his temper and obsession with Carla, he had sent her multiple threatening messages, warning her that betrayal had consequences. However, Vincent had a solid alibi the night Mark died, confirmed by multiple eyewitnesses and surveillance footage. While suspicion initially fell on him, police soon realized that the true threat might be someone far closer, someone who had a reason to manipulate the chaos surrounding Carla's affairs for personal gain. As the case unfolded, investigators began to examine Mark's inner circle. Friends, colleagues, and even neighbors were scrutinized for hidden motives. Every detail was dissected, from financial transactions to secret meetings. The more they uncovered, the more it became apparent that someone had orchestrated events with meticulous care, ensuring that suspicion would fall on Carla or her lovers rather than the true perpetrator. Meanwhile, Carla appeared increasingly anxious, her composed exterior faltering as police pressed for details. She had lived through threats, fear, and betrayal, yet she seemed unaware of the full extent of the danger surrounding her. Mark's death had exposed a larger, more sinister reality, a calculated plan by someone with knowledge of both Mark's obsession and Carla's secrets. The investigation was no longer just about a husband's death. It was about uncovering a hidden enemy capable of striking without warning, someone willing to manipulate trust and betrayal to deadly effect. The investigation took a shocking turn when forensic experts discovered evidence that pointed toward an unexpected suspect. Amid the chaos surrounding Carla's affairs and the men connected to her, the missing notebook, thought lost, was found hidden in a trash bin near the edge of the property. Partial fingerprints were recovered, but they did not belong to Mark, Carla, or Vincent Hayes. Instead, they matched Daniel Reed, Mark's longtime friend and confidant. Detectives were stunned. The man who had appeared loyal and concerned now became the center of suspicion. Further investigation revealed that Daniel had his own secret motives. He had been financially struggling for months, accumulating debts that he feared would be exposed. Even more shocking, evidence suggested he had been secretly involved with Carla for some time, hiding the affair from Mark. The realization hit hard. Daniel had been manipulating events from the shadows, keeping Mark isolated, feeding his paranoia, and ensuring he would not suspect the true threat lurking so close. Every warning, every late-night note, and every sense of being watched had been carefully orchestrated by someone Mark trusted implicitly. Detectives began to reconstruct the timeline, comparing Daniel's movements with the night of the murder. Surveillance footage, witness accounts, and digital records painted a damning picture. Daniel had opportunities to enter the Lawson home without being noticed, and he had knowledge of Mark's routines and vulnerabilities. The missing notebook, the anonymous threats, and the orchestrated chaos all pointed to premeditation. Carla's position shifted from primary suspect to unintended pawn in a much larger scheme. She had been involved with multiple men, but it was Daniel's calculated betrayal that had escalated the situation to murder. The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation, redefining everything police thought they knew. Mark's death was no longer simply the tragic result of heartbreak and paranoia. It was a meticulously planned act of betrayal by the person he had trusted most, someone who had manipulated both him and Carla to achieve a deadly outcome. The final pieces of the puzzle fell into place as investigators confronted Daniel Reed with the mounting evidence against him. His calm, composed demeanor finally cracked under the weight of truth. Daniel confessed to meticulously planning Mark Lawson's murder, revealing a chilling level of calculation and deceit. He admitted that his secret affair with Carla had motivated him, but financial desperation and fear of exposure had driven him to ensure Mark would never uncover the truth. The gunshot wound had been staged to look like suicide, and every element of the crime scene had been manipulated to mislead investigators. Daniel explained how he had tracked Mark's obsession, using it to his advantage. He had sent the anonymous notes and orchestrated the mysterious threats, ensuring Mark would become increasingly isolated and vulnerable. The missing notebook, the broken glass, and the subtle manipulation of the home environment had all been part of a plan designed to make the death appear as if it were the tragic result of paranoia and heartbreak. By exploiting the chaos surrounding Carla's affairs, Daniel had successfully hidden his role in the murder. The revelation shocked everyone connected to the case. Friends, neighbors, and even Carla herself struggled to comprehend the betrayal. The person Mark had trusted implicitly had turned out to be the architect of his demise. Carla, once the focus of suspicion, was now seen as an unwitting participant in a deadly scheme. The court case that followed exposed Daniel's intricate planning and deceit. Evidence, digital records, and witness testimonies all painted a damning picture of premeditated murder. Justice was eventually served, but the impact of the betrayal lingered long after the trial ended. Mark Lawson's death became a cautionary tale about trust, obsession, and deception. The story reminded everyone that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are not strangers, but those who appear closest to you, hiding their true intentions behind a mask of loyalty and friendship.